Chapter 3. "Where did you find it?" Maigret asked Lucas. "On the highest shelf of the cupboard in the kitchen." It was a white cardboard shoebox, and Lucas had left on the side table the red string that had been around it when he discovered it. Its contents reminded Maigret of other treasures that he had seen so often in the country or among poor people. A marriage license, a few yellowed letters, sometimes a receipt from a pawn shop, not always in a box, but in a soup tureen from the best dinner set, or in a fruit bowl. Louise Fion's treasure wasn't so different. It didn't include a marriage license, but part of a birth certificate issued by the town hall of the 18th arrondissement, stating that Louise Marie Josephine Fion was born in Paris, daughter of Louis Fion, slaughterhouse worker, living in Rue de Cambrai, near the La Villette abattoir, and of Philippine Leflemme, laundress. It was probably the mother who appeared in a photograph taken by a local photographer. The traditional backdrop showed a park with a balustrade in the foreground. The woman, who must have been about 30 when the photograph was taken, had been incapable of smiling to order and was staring straight ahead. She had presumably had other children apart from Louise, because her body was already shapeless, her breasts empty in her blouse. Lucas had sat down in the armchair he had been occupying before going to open the door to Maigret. The latter had been unable to stop himself smiling as he came in, because near the ashtray, in which was burning a cigarette, lay one of Lulu's cheap novels. The sergeant must have grabbed it out of boredom, and had already read almost half of it. "She died," Lucas said, pointing to the photograph, 7 years ago." He handed his chief a press cutting from the Births, Deaths and Marriages column, which listed the people who had died that day, among them Philippine Fion, née Leflemme. The two men had left the door ajar, and Maigret was listening out for the noise of the lift. The only time it had been in operation, it had stopped on the second floor. "What about her father?" "Just this letter." It was written in pencil on cheap paper, and the handwriting was that of someone who hadn't had much schooling. "Dear Louise, this is just to tell you that I'm in hospital again, and I'm very unhappy. Maybe you'll be kind enough to send me a bit of money so that I can buy tobacco. They say eating makes me sick, and they're letting me die of hunger. I'm sending this letter to the bar, where someone who is here claims he saw you. I suppose they know you there. I won't make old bones. Your father." In the corner was the name of a hospital in Béziers, in the Hérault. The letter was undated, so there was no way of knowing when it had been written, probably 2 or 3 years earlier, to judge by how much the paper had yellowed. Had Louise Fion received other letters? Why had she only kept this one? Was it because her father had died soon afterwards? "Make inquiries in Béziers." "All right, Chief." Maigret didn't see any other letters, just photographs, most taken at fairgrounds, some showing Louise on her own, others with Pierrot. There were also some identity photographs of a young woman taken with automatic cameras. The rest consisted of trifling objects, also one at the fair: an earthenware dog, an ashtray, a drawn glass elephant, even paper flowers. It would have been normal to unearth a treasure like this one somewhere in the area of Barbey or Boulevard de la Chapelle. Here, in an apartment on Avenue Carnot, the cardboard box took on an almost tragic aspect. "Anything else?" Just as Lucas was about to reply, the phone rang, making them both jump. Maigret hastened to pick up the receiver. "Hello?" he said. "Is Monsieur Maigret there?" The voice was a woman's. "Speaking." "I'm sorry to disturb you. I phoned your office and they told me you were probably here, or that you would drop by. This is Madame Gouin speaking." "I'm listening." "May I come down and have a brief word with you?" "Wouldn't it be easier if I came upstairs?" The voice was firm. It remained so now as the reply came, "I'd rather come down, to avoid my husband finding you in our apartment when he gets home." "As you wish." "I'll be right there." Maigret had time to whisper to Lucas, "The wife of Professor Gouin, who lives upstairs." A few moments later they heard footsteps on the stairs, then someone coming through the first door, which had been left open, and closing it behind her. Then there was a knock at the door communicating with the entrance hall, which had remained ajar, and Maigret stepped forwards. "Come in, madame," he said. She did so naturally, as she might have come into any apartment, and without looking round the room, her gaze immediately settled on Maigret. "Let me introduce Sergeant Lucas, if you'd like to sit down." "Thank you." She was tall and quite sturdy, without being fat. Gouin was 62, but she was probably 45, and seemed no older. I assume you're rather expecting my phone call, she said with a hint of a smile. Did the concierge tell you? She hesitated for a moment without taking her eyes off him, and her smile intensified. Yes, she did. She just phoned me. So you knew I was here. The reason you called my office was to make your coming to see me appear spontaneous. She barely blushed and lost nothing of her self-confidence. I should have suspected you would guess. I would have got in touch with you in any case, believe me. I've been meaning to talk to you since this morning when I found out what happened here. Why didn't you do so? Perhaps because I'd rather my husband wasn't mixed up in this business. Maigret had not taken his eyes off her. He had noticed that she hadn't even glanced at her surroundings, that she had shown no curiosity. When were you last here, madame? This time again there was a slight blush on her cheeks, but she continued to play the game well. So you know that too, though I can't see who could have told you, not even Madame Colney. She thought it over, and soon found the answer to her own question. I suppose I haven't behaved like someone coming into an apartment for the first time, especially an apartment where a murder's been committed. Lucas was sitting now on the sofa, almost in the place that Louise Fillon's body had been occupying that morning. Madame Gouin had settled into an armchair, and Maigret remained standing, his back to the fireplace, in which there were only fake logs. Anyway, I'll answer you. One night, 7 or 8 months ago, the girl who lived here called me in a panic because my husband had just had a blackout. It was his heart. Was he in the bedroom? Yes. I came down and gave him first aid. You've studied medicine. Before our marriage, I was a nurse. Ever since she had come in, Maigret had been wondering what her background was, but had been unable to figure it out for himself. Now he better understood that self-confidence of hers. Carry on. That's about it. I was going to phone a doctor who's a friend of ours when Etienne came round and forbade me to call anybody. Was he surprised to find you at his bedside? No, he's always told me everything. He's never hidden anything from me. That night he came back upstairs with me and finally fell asleep peacefully. Was it his first attack? He'd had another one 3 years earlier, but that was milder. She was still calm and self-controlled, just as you imagined her in her nurse's uniform by a patient's bedside. Of the two men, Lucas was the more surprised, as he wasn't yet familiar with the situation and couldn't understand how a woman could speak so calmly about her husband's mistress. Why did you want to speak to me this evening? Maigret asked. The concierge told me you intended to talk to my husband. I wondered if it wasn't possible to avoid that, if a conversation with me wouldn't provide you with the same information. Do you know the professor? Only by reputation. He's an extraordinary man. You find only a few like him in a generation. Maigret nodded. He devotes his whole life to his work, which he regards as a true vocation. Apart from his classes and his duties at the Cochin Hospital, he sometimes performs 3 or 4 operations on the same day, and I'm sure you know these are extremely difficult operations. Is it any surprise that I should make every effort to spare him any worries? Have you seen your husband since the death of Louise Fillon? He came home for lunch. This morning when he left, there were already comings and goings in this apartment, but we didn't know anything. How did he seem at lunch? It was a blow to him. Did he love her? She looked at him for a moment without replying. Then she glanced at Lucas, whose presence she seemed to find disagreeable. I think, Monsieur Maigret, from what I know of you, that you're a man capable of understanding. It's precisely because other people wouldn't understand that I'd like to avoid this story getting out. The professor is a man who shouldn't be the object of gossip, and his activities are too valuable to everyone to risk undermining them by pointless worries. In spite of himself, Maigret glanced at the place Lulu's body had occupied that morning, and it was a kind of comment on the words, pointless worries. Do you mind if I try to give you some idea of his character? Not at all. You probably know that he was born into a family of poor peasants in the Cevennes. I knew he came from a peasant family. What he's become by force of will. It wouldn't be too much of an exaggeration to say that he was never a child or a young man. You understand what I mean? Very well. He's a kind of force of nature. Even though I'm his wife, I don't mind saying that he's a man of genius, because others have said it before me and continue to say it. Maigret was still nodding. People in general have a strange attitude to geniuses. They're prepared to admit that they're different from other people as far as intelligence and professional activities are concerned. Any patient of his thinks it's only natural that Gouin should get up at 2 o'clock in the morning for an emergency operation that only he can perform, and that by 9 o'clock he should be at the hospital, dealing with other patients. But those same patients would be shocked to learn that he's different from them in other ways, too. Maigret could guess what was coming next, but he preferred to let her talk. She did so with persuasive calm. Etienne has never bothered with the little pleasures of life. He has no real friends. I don't remember him ever taking a proper holiday. His expenditure of energy is incredible. The only way he's ever found to relax is with women. She glanced at Lucas, then turned again to Maigret. I hope I'm not shocking you. Not at all. Do you understand what I'm saying? He's not the kind of man to flirt with women. He wouldn't have the patience or the inclination. What he asks of them is some quick relief, and I don't think he's ever been in love in his life. Not even with you? I've often wondered that. I really don't know. We've been married for 22 years. Before our marriage, he was a bachelor and lived with an old housekeeper. In this building? Yes. He just happened to rent our apartment when he was 30, and it's never occurred to him to move, not even when he was appointed to Cochin, which is on the other side of the city. Were you in his department? Yes. I imagine I can speak to you frankly. It was still the presence of Lucas that embarrassed her, and Lucas, who sensed it, was ill at ease and kept crossing and uncrossing his short legs. For months he paid no attention to me. I knew, as did the whole hospital, that most of the nurses had their turn eventually, and that it never led to anything. By the next day he always seemed to have forgotten. One night, when I was on duty and we had to wait for the result of an operation that had lasted 3 hours, he had me, without a word. Did you love him? I think I did. I certainly admired him. A few days later, I was surprised when he asked me out to lunch with him in a restaurant on Faubourg Saint-Jacques. He asked me if I was married. He hadn't shown any interest in that before then. Then he asked me what my parents did, and I told him my father was a fisherman in Brittany. Am I boring you? Not at all. I really would like you to understand. Aren't you afraid he'll come back and be surprised not to find you upstairs? Before coming down, I phoned the Saint-Joseph Clinic, where he's operating right now, and I know he won't get home till 7:30. It was 6:15 now. What was I saying? Oh, yes, we had lunch together, and he wanted to know what my father did. This is where it gets harder, especially as I wouldn't want you to get the wrong idea. It reassured him to know that I came from a similar family to his. What nobody knows is that he's terribly shy. I was going to say unhealthily shy, but only with people who belong to a different social class. I assume that's why he was still unmarried at the age of 40 and why he'd never moved in what's called society. All the girls he had were common. I understand. I wonder if, with someone else, he could have... She blushed as she said these words, thus giving them a specific meaning. He got used to me, even though he never stopped behaving with the others the way he always had. Then one fine day he asked me, almost absent-mindedly, if I wanted to marry him. That's our whole story. I came to live here. I've kept house for him. Did the housekeeper leave? A week after we were married. Needless to say, I'm not jealous. That would be ridiculous on my part. Maigret couldn't remember ever looking at anyone so intensely as he was looking at this woman. She sensed it and wasn't intimidated. On the contrary, she appeared to understand the interest he had in her. She was trying to say everything, to leave no character trait of her great man in the shadows. He continued sleeping with the nurses, with his successive assistants, in fact with any girl he came across who wasn't likely to complicate his life. Perhaps that's the main point. He would never accept an affair that would make him waste time he considered he owes to his work. What about Lulu? You already know she was called Lulu. I'm getting there. It's as simple as the rest, you'll see. Do you mind if I get a glass of water? Lucas tried to stand up, but she'd already got to the kitchen, where they heard a tap running. When she sat down again, her lips were moist and there was a drop of liquid on her chin. She wasn't pretty, in the usual sense of the word, nor was she beautiful, in spite of her regular features. But she was pleasant to look at. There was a kind of calming influence in her. Maigret would have liked to be treated by her if he was sick. And she was also the kind of woman you could have lunch or dinner with somewhere without worrying about keeping up the conversation. A friend, in other words, someone who understood everything, who was never surprised or shocked or offended by anything. I suppose you know how old he is? 62. Yes. Mind you, he's lost none of his vigour, and I use the word in all its senses. All the same, I think all men, at a certain age, are terrified at the thought of seeing their virility diminish. Realizing as she spoke that Maigret was over 50, she stammered, "Oh, I'm sorry." "It's all right." It was the first time they had smiled at each other. I suppose it's the same with other men. I have no idea. The fact is, Etienne has been even more determined than ever in his sexual activities. Haven't I shocked you yet? Not yet. About 2 years ago, he had a young patient, Louise Fillon, whose life he miraculously saved. I assume you already know about her previous life. She comes from as far down the social ladder as it's possible to come, and that's probably what interested my husband. Maigret nodded, because everything she said sounded true, with all the simplicity of a police report. It must have started at the hospital when she was convalescing. Then he set her up in an apartment in Rue de Lafayette, after mentioning it to me casually. He didn't go into details. He's always been reticent about such things. All at once, in the course of a meal, he told me what he'd done, or what he was intending to do. I didn't ask him any more questions. And then we didn't speak about it any more. Was it you who suggested she come and live in this building? It seemed to please her that Maigret had guessed. For you to understand, I need to go into more detail. I'm sorry to be taking so long, but it all hangs together. Etienne used to drive his car himself. A few years ago, 4 years to be precise, he had a small accident on Place de la Concorde. He knocked down a woman who was passing. Luckily, she escaped with bruises. All the same, he was upset. For a few months we had a chauffeur, but he never got used to it. It shocked him that a man in the prime of life should have nothing better to do than wait for him for hours at the curb. I offered to drive him, but that wasn't practical either, so he got into the habit of using taxis. The car stayed in the garage for several months, and we ended up selling it. In the morning, it's always the same taxi driver who comes to pick him up and drives him around for the rest of the day. It's quite a long way from here to Faubourg Saint-Jacques. He has patients at Neuilly, too, and often in other hospitals around the city. Going to Rue Lafayette on top of all that. Maigret was still nodding, while Lucas seemed to be dozing off. As luck would have it, an apartment became free in this building. One moment. Did your husband often spend the night in Rue Lafayette? Only part of the night. He's always tried to be here in the morning for when his assistant, who's also his secretary, gets here. She gave a little laugh. In a way, it was all because of these domestic complications. I asked him if there was any reason he shouldn't set up the girl here. You knew who she was? I knew everything about her, including the fact that she had a boyfriend named Pierrot. Did he also know that? Yes. He wasn't jealous. He probably wouldn't have liked to find him with Lulu, but as long as it happened when he wasn't there. Carry on. He agreed to the idea. What about her? Apparently, she resisted for a while. What, in your opinion, were Louise Fillon's feelings for the professor? Maigret was starting automatically to talk in the same tone as Madame Gouin about this man he had never seen and who seemed almost present in the room. Would you like me to be frank? Please. First of all, like all the women who come near him, she fell under his spell. You're going to think it's a strange kind of pride on my part, but even though he isn't what people call handsome, and he's far from young, I know few women who have resisted him. Women instinctively feel his strength, and this time she couldn't find the words she was looking for. Anyway, it's a fact, and I don't think the women you question will contradict me. This girl was just like the others. What's more, he saved her life, and treated her in a way she wasn't used to being treated. All clear and logical so far. To be perfectly honest, I'm convinced the question of money played its part. If not money exactly, at least the prospect of a certain security, a life devoid of worries. Did she ever talk about leaving him for her boyfriend? Not as far as I know. Did you ever see the man? I passed him once at the front entrance. Did he come here often? Generally not. She'd meet him in the afternoon, somewhere or other. On rare occasions he came to see her. Did your husband know that? It's possible. Would he have been displeased? Perhaps, though not out of jealousy. It's hard to explain. Was your husband very fond of the girl? She owed him everything. He was almost her creator, since without him she would have died. Maybe he was thinking of the day when he wouldn't have any others. Plus, with her, although this is only a supposition, he felt no shame. And with you? She stared at the carpet for a moment. I'm a woman, after all. He almost retorted, while she was nothing, because that was clearly what she thought. Perhaps it was what the professor thought, too. He preferred not to say it. All three were silent for a moment. Outside, the rain was still falling noiselessly. Lights had come on in the building opposite, and a shadow was moving behind the cream-coloured curtains of an apartment. "Tell me about last night," Maigret said at last. He indicated his pipe, which he had just filled. "Do you mind?" "Not at all." So far, he had been so interested in Madame Gouin that he had not thought about smoking. "What would you like me to tell you?" "First, a detail. Was your husband in the habit of sleeping in her apartment?" "It was extremely rare. Upstairs we occupy the whole floor. On the left is what we call the apartment. On the right my husband has his bedroom and bathroom, a library, another room where even the floor is piled high with scientific pamphlets, and finally his office and his secretary's office." "So you sleep separately?" "We always have. Our rooms are only separated by a boudoir." "May I ask you an indiscreet question?" "You're perfectly entitled." "Do you still have marital relations with your husband?" She looked once again at poor Luca, who was feeling superfluous and didn't know what to do with himself. "Not often." "In other words, almost never." "That's right." "How long has that been the case?" "Some years." "Do you miss it?" Unembarrassed, she smiled and nodded. "You're asking me to tell all, and I'm ready to answer you as frankly as possible. Let's say I miss it a little." "Do you ever let on to him about that?" "Certainly not." "Do you have a lover?" "The idea's never even crossed my mind." She paused and looked straight at him. "Do you believe me?" "Yes." "I'm grateful. People don't always accept the truth. When you're the companion of a man like Gouin, you're prepared to make certain sacrifices." "So he would go downstairs to see her and come back up again?" "Yes." "Is that what he did last night?" "No, it didn't happen every day. Sometimes almost a week would go by with him just dropping in on her for a few minutes. It depended on his work. I suppose it also depended on the opportunities he found elsewhere." "You mean he continued having relations with other women?" "The kind of relations I described to you."
"And yesterday?"
"He saw her for a few minutes after dinner. I know that because he didn't take the lift when he left, which is a sign."
"How can you be sure he only stayed for a few minutes?"
"Because I heard him come out of this apartment and summon the lift."
"Were you listening out for him?"
"You're terrible, Monsieur Maigret. I was listening out for him, yes, as I always did. Not out of jealousy, but how can I explain without appearing pretentious? Because I considered it my duty, in a way, to protect him, to know everything he did, where he was, to follow him in my thoughts."
"What time was it?"
"About 8. We'd eaten quickly because he was supposed to spend the evening at Cochin. He was worried about the consequences of an operation he'd performed in the afternoon and wanted to stay within easy reach of the patient."
"So, he spent a few minutes in her apartment, then took the lift?"
"Yes. His assistant, Mademoiselle Decaux, was waiting for him downstairs, as she usually does when he goes back in the evening to the hospital. She lives not far from here, in Rue des Acacias, and they always travel together."
"Does she also?" he asked, giving an obvious meaning to these words.
"Yes, on occasion. Does that strike you as monstrous?"
"No."
Where was I? My sister arrived at about 8:30.
"Does she live in Paris?"
"On Boulevard Saint-Michel, opposite the École des Mines. Antoinette is 5 years older than me and has never married. She works in a municipal library and is the very model of a spinster."
"Does she know about your husband's life?"
"She doesn't know everything, but from what she's discovered, she thoroughly hates and despises him."
"So they don't get on?"
"She never even talks to him. My sister is still a devout Catholic, and for her, Gouin is the devil incarnate."
"And how does he treat her?"
"He ignores her. She doesn't come here very often, and only when I'm alone in the apartment."
"So she avoids him?"
"As much as possible."
"And yet
Yesterday. I see the concierge told you everything. It's true. They met last night. I didn't expect my husband back before midnight at the earliest. My sister and I were chatting.
What about?
This and that.
Did you talk about Lulu?
I don't think so.
Aren't you sure?
Actually, I am. I don't know why I gave that evasive answer. As a matter of fact, we talked about our parents.
Are they dead?
My mother's dead, but my father's still alive in Finisterre. We have other sisters there. There were 8 of us, 6 girls and 2 boys.
Do any of them live in Paris?
Only Antoinette and I. At 11:30, perhaps a little earlier, we were surprised to hear the door open and see Etienne come in. He simply nodded. Antoinette said goodbye and left almost immediately.
Did your husband go downstairs?
No. He was tired and worried about his patient, whose condition wasn't as satisfactory as he would have liked.
I assume he has a key to this apartment.
Of course.
During the evening, did anything unusual happen? Did your sister and you hear any noise?
In these old stone buildings, you can't hear anything from one apartment to another, let alone one floor to another. She looked at the time on her wristwatch and grew nervous. I'm so sorry, but I'm going to have to go back upstairs. Etienne may be back any minute now. Do you have any other questions to ask me?
I can't think of any for the moment.
Do you think it'll be possible for you to avoid questioning him?
I can't promise anything, but I'll only bother your husband if I consider it indispensable.
What do you think now?
Now, I don't consider it indispensable.
She stood up and held out her hand, as a man would have done without taking her eyes off him. I'm very grateful, Monsieur Maigret.
As she was turning, her gaze fell on the cardboard box and the photographs, but Maigret couldn't see the expression on her face.
I'm at home all day. You can come and see me when my husband isn't in. But in saying that, I'm sure you'll understand it isn't a demand, but a request.
It never occurred to me to think otherwise.
Thank you.
She went out, closing the 2 doors behind her, while little Luca looked at Maigret with an air of a man who has just received a blow on the head. He was so afraid of saying something stupid that he kept silent, observing Maigret's face, in the hope of reading on it what he must be thinking.